Hey everybody, it's Suze from Revelation Quilts. Check out this awesome quilt behind me. This is the Colorful Cascade Herringbone Quilt Kit that I got from the Fabric Cut. I'm going to do a tutorial on this and show you how easy it is to put together. So let's go, follow along, and you can make this quilt. Great kit. I highly suggest you check it out. So this is everything that you get in the quilt, and it's actually quite impressive. I love all of the colors. So on your far left, that is your binding, and then all of these colors are pre-cut and ready for you to go. And in the upper right, those are your background squares, and then there's the pattern. But the best part of this kit is that it includes the backing, which you never see in a kit. So I'm super excited to get started with this, and let's see how it goes. All right, so let's get started. This is the block you're gonna make. All the blocks are the same except for one thing. The only thing that changes in each block are the colors that you choose. So this block is put together by rows, just like this. Let me turn it this way, because this matches the diagram in the pattern. So all the blocks are the same except for the color choices. The background squares, which are white, are all the same place in every block. So let's make this block. Let me show you how. So for each block, you will need 4 background squares, just like this, and then your colors will change in each block, as I mentioned before, but you'll have an A, a B, a C, and a D. So your A color will include 1 square and 1 of the shorter rectangles. Your B block, you will need only 1 of the longer rectangles. Your C squares, you will need 3 of those in whatever color you choose, and your D will also be 3 squares of whatever color you choose. So let me show you how to put this together. I'm going to show you piece by piece. So there's 4 rows. So the first row will get 2 background squares. And just so you know, the first row and the third row are exactly the same. So we can put our background squares right there. So in the first row, you'll have 1 background square, 1 C square, another background square, and then 1 D square. So the third row is exactly the same. So we can just put that together exactly how the first row is. There you go. So now we've got our first row and our third row done there. The second row gets an A square, just like that, and then another C square, and then the A square, the rectangle, the shorter rectangle, just like that. So it looks like it's one continuous line and across there. And then the fourth row, the final row, gets your long B, as in boy, B rectangle, and then another D square. So we're going to sew this together by rows, and the pattern suggests that you should press all of your seams open, because if you press them to the side, they will not nest. However, I saw that as a challenge, and so when I sew these together, I'm going to alternate the direction that I press my seam allowances. So this first one will go to the right, the second row will go to the left, to the right, and to the left, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to alternate that with each block. So when I join the blocks together, I should be able to nest these seams. So let me get this sewn together. I'm going to start with each row. I'm going to sew this first row together, then the second row, then the third row, and then the fourth row, and then I will join the rows together to create the block. Now it also really helps to have a small cutting mat, or I'm using my rotating cutting mat, to lay the blocks out so that it can just carry this right over to my sewing machine because I've got all the other squares laid out on my table so that I can kind of randomize my color choices because I want every block to have a different color combination. So here I've got each row sewn separately, and I have alternated the direction that I've put my seam allowance. So on this one, all of my seam allowances are going towards the right. This one, they're going towards the left, so that when I sew these rows together, these seams will nest really, really well. And now when I do my next block, I will start with the first seam going to the left so that when I do sew my blocks together, they will nest really well. So now I am going to sew these 4 blocks, these 4 strips together. I will start with the first 2, and then I will be able to lock those seams right next to each other so they will nest really, really well. So let me get these sewn together, and I'll show you what it looks like. So there is the block with all of the rows sewn together. Now the unfinished block should measure 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches. I will need to, you know, clean this up a little bit and get it straight. But this is what the block looks like. So every block will look just a little bit different because of the colors that you choose. So let's get these all put together in random color combinations, and let's get them up on the board. So if you're interested in pressing your seams to the side, let me show you how I chain piece this block. So I've got it laid out here on my rotating cutting mat so I can move it and carry it around. But whenever I chain piece a block like this, I always I look at columns. I see things in columns. So I start with the upper left side, the first 2 columns. That is what I'm going to start to chain piece together. So I'm going to take the top piece in the second column, and I'm just going to put them over like this. And I'm only going to be working with the first 2 columns right now, and then the first 3 rows, because this is a larger piece. So I'm going to sew these together right along the edge there with a 1/4 inch seam. Now the pattern suggests that you do a scant 1/4 inch. So if it's a little smaller than a 1/4 inch, that is just fine. And I'm just going to sew down, leaving my needle down and going right to the next one and just chain piecing these together, lining them up. And now the third one, make sure your squares are all lined up nicely. And the way that this kit is cut, all your pieces should fit together beautifully. Now once I've got these first 3 sewn together, I'm going to stagger the direction that I am going to finger press the seam allowance. So on the first one, if I can get them apart here, the first one, I'm going to put the seam allowance to the left, and I'm just going to finger press it for now. The second one, I'm going to make the seam allowance go the opposite way, so to the right. And with each block I do, I'll alternate it. So the next block I do, I'll start with the top row and I'll press that seam allowance to the right. But for this one, I'm just going to alternate which direction the seam allowance is going. And there I've got my first row sewn together. Now I'm going to take the next one in the row and just attach that right down the line to this one. Hopefully this is making sense. Leaving it on my machine, I'm going to take the next piece in the next row and attach that, even though it's a little longer, and that's okay. We're going to attach it right now. And now I will take the third piece in the third row and attach that one. And now let me scooch this over just a tad. And now I'm going to continue with my finger pressing, and I'm going to make sure this one is also going in the same direction as the first one. So it's going to be pressed to the left, the seam allowance. This piece right here, the seam allowance will go to the right, just like that. And then to the left again. And this is nice because I don't have to take it to the iron every time. So now I'm ready for the fourth and final column. And you notice we've left these alone so far, but we're going to add them on this round. So I'm going to take the top piece in the fourth column and attach this one just like this. And here I'm going to cut my thread because this row is done. So I'm just going to skip that one, bypass it, and take my third piece and attach that right here, just like so. And now I can take this final row and sew these together. I haven't lifted my needle up from my machine yet. I'm just gonna chain piece this piece on. And now when I go to finger press these, everything again is gonna go in the same direction. This row is all going to the left. Just gonna finger press. This one's already done. This one is also going to the left since we're alternating the direction with each row. And then this one will go to the right. But when I do my next block, I will do it the opposite way. So now that that is done, now I'm just going to turn it to the side like this, and I'm going to flip this over, and I can get these seams to nest just perfectly. So when I put them up together, I can feel that seam is nested perfectly, and I can just slide that right into my machine and sew right down. When I get to an intersection that's nested, I usually stop and line up the next one. And the last one doesn't have to be nested because the one underneath of it, there's no seam. So you're just making sure that it's lined up. So when I open this up, that is perfectly lined up. And so now I can take this and just flip it over and do the exact same thing. Line up those seams so they're all nested. You can feel it. It's very, very easy. Stop and nest the next one in line. And the final one. Make sure your seam is going the right way underneath. All right, so I've got 3 of them sewn together. This one is still attached right at the bottom. And I just find it's easier to turn the whole thing around, flip this one over, and nest just that one seam right there. And sew that on, making sure that the seams underneath are going in the correct direction. All right, and then you can go ahead. I like to, so that, oh, sorry, I bumped the camera. So there is your block, just like that. It's not pressed, but it looks exactly like it is supposed to look. Now, when I go to press this, I like to start by turning it over, and I press everything all going in the exact same direction. So this one, I'm starting with this long piece here and pressing away from that. And then the next block I sew together, I will press everything the opposite way. So when I go to press it, I'll press it toward that one. But for now, we're going to press it away. And then this block is done. And it was very easy by using this chain piecing method. Get that little thread there. By using that chain piecing method, everything just stays in place exactly where it's supposed to go, and you don't get mixed up on where each little square goes in this block. So that is how I chain piece these blocks. I hope that you were able to find that helpful. Now you'll make a total of 60 blocks, but you'll only need 50 blocks for the body of the quilt. So with the extra blocks, you will take one of those blocks and you will cut it both ways on the diagonal, and these will be your corner triangles. And with the additional 9 blocks now that you have left over, 5 of them will be cut on the diagonal in one direction, and those will be for your side setting triangles. And then the remaining 4 will be cut in the opposite direction on the diagonal, and those will be your top and bottom setting triangles. So make sure you follow the pattern very carefully and cut those accordingly. They have to be cut in a very specific way in order to maintain the orientation of the block. So once you have it all up on your design wall or on the floor or whatever surface where you're laying out your quilt, the next thing to do is to sew these blocks together in rows. And since everything is on point, meaning that it is diagonally placed, the rows are going to be diagonal rows. So technically, your corner piece up here is your very first row. And then the next row will be a corner piece, or I'm sorry, a setting triangle, and then a block, and then another setting triangle. And then you will align those along the long edge. So you may have a little bit sticking up at the top, and that's okay, because they will all get trimmed, or they will be hidden within the seam allowance. So you will put your rows together diagonally until you've got all of your blocks sewn together in rows, and then you will sew your rows together. And then with each row, you can alternate the way that you're pressing your seam allowance so that all of your rows will nest when you sew those rows together. Very, very simple. So let's get these sewn up. So that is the Colorful Cascade Herringbone kit from the Fabric Cut. I hope that this tutorial helped you and it gave you lots of tips and tricks for a successful kit. Now don't forget, the kit also includes the binding, which is phenomenal, but the best part is that the kit includes your backing, which again is very rare for a kit. I really enjoyed putting this together, and I think that you will too. So have a great time making this quilt. Enjoy.